Hey, welcome back. All right, today we're going to continue our discussion about Egypt. Last time we were together, we spent the entire class period with Egypt. You should be very familiar with such personalities as King Tut, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, the Egyptian death cult. We talked about Ra, talked about Osiris, Isis, and that's all interesting material here. So let's start wrapping this up because we got a lot of ground to cover today, a number of topics here. I'm going to go to my documents camera, and we'll use this as an outline. And we want to go through the Egyptian society, and I'm just going to open this and let you see all of this. The hierarchy in the Egyptian society consisted of the royal family. Of course, that was the pharaoh. And then we had priests or secondary priests, nobles, middle class, that's merchants and scribes, and kind of wealthy farmers. The vast majority of the population was peasants, and by and large that was it in the Egyptian population here, in the Egyptian hierarchy. As we moved into the 18th and 19th and 20th dynasties, you'll see a professional military, and then throughout much of this we'll also have a large number of slaves here. Whether they were Hebrew slaves, we just do not know. Also in the Egyptian society, it was polygamy. That means multiple spouses, or actually multiple wives, was permitted. But 99% or 90% at least of the Egyptians lived monogamous relationship. Usually the pharaoh was a king, but on occasion you would have a queen. One of the best known is that Hatshepsut, Queen Hatshepsut. If you look through your material, and some of the illustrations, or I should say some of the photographs in your textbook, I think there's one in there of Queen Hatshepsut. Don't be surprised, you'll always see the queen with a beard. Why the Egyptians did that, I don't know, but they would always depict the queen, such as Hatshepsut, with a beard. A couple other personalities I did not mention was Thutmose I, Thutmose III. Queen Hatshepsut was the caretaker, I believe, if you will, for Thutmose III. Now, in the Egyptian society, it was largely an agrarian society. If you don't understand that word, agrarian society, it means it's a farming society. And they grew a number of crops to include wheat, barley, millet, vegetables, fruits, flax, cotton, and always dates. When you're traveling in that area, you'll see just dates that are growing everywhere, date trees growing everywhere. They would serve to trade with Crete, the island of Crete. I'll show you where that is on the map at a later time in the class period. Trade with Lebanon. And, of course, what you generally do in trading, you trade what you have an excess of. You trade for something you have a deficiency of. And the Egyptians had an excess of wheat, and gold, and linen, as cotton. Egyptian cotton is pretty fine cotton. They would import things that they needed: silver, ivory, lumber. For the wealthy would live in magnificent villas, fragrant gardens, shady groves. And for the wealthy, their diet would consist of meats and poultry, always dates, cakes, wines, beer, fruit, sweets. And they would eat off vessels that were made of alabaster and gold and silver. For the peasants lived in mud-baked shacks. All right, so anyway, that's going to draw it to a conclusion there, our section on the Egyptians. But I'm going to go into two other societies. Let me get this back up here. And not much is known about these societies. Now, I guess one of the most important things you need to do here is actually learn how to pronounce these. These societies, the Minoan Society, and we also had the Mycenaean Society. So work on your pronunciation with that. And before 1870, no one guessed that there were great civilizations that existed in the Greek archipelago. This was 100 years before the civilization of Athens and Greece. And we'll be talking about Greece before you know it here. But the first major breakthrough took place in the middle 1800s, and it dealt with an individual who was a German businessman, who led an expedition into Asia Minor, and Asia Minor is where Saudi Arabia is today, trying to discover and uncover this ancient city of Troy that had been largely destroyed during the Trojan War. This Trojan War, which had been recorded by blind Homer in the year 800, around the year 800 BCE, and it's thought that if the Trojan War did take place, it was about 1200 BCE. So, the Homer's account, if Homer actually did write this, was 500 years later. So it's an interesting story. We'll talk about it not and further today with the Iliad and the Odyssey. But was it true or was it not? I don't know. Still makes a good story to do this. All right, but actually Heinrich Schliemann did find the city of Troy, and actually was 9 cities stacked atop each other. And that's not too terribly uncommon here, my friends. I'll tell you about a city later in this class period, which had 25 cities stacked on top of each other. And, much of that has been excavated. And next, Heinrich Schliemann in 1876 in Mycenae. Now, Mycenae is part of the Greek Peloponnesus. Peloponnesus means the mainland, if you will. And what he was in search for was the ancient home and site of Agamemnon. Now, if you look through your chapters here, and it'll be somewhere around page 52, somewhere around that, you'll find what some people thought was a death match to Agamemnon, and it actually was not there too. And anyway, so following this, the discoveries of Heinrich Schliemann, another individual, Arthur Evans, there's Agamemnon, by the way, on how to spell that, another explorer, or archaeologist by the name Arthur Evans, went in search of the ancient kingdom of King Minos. Let's see if I have it here. King Minos. And this is located on the island of Crete. If you're following in your textbook, you can see where this is on page 52. And I'll try to share this with you if I can here. Let's see if we can find this. And this is Greece up here. You can only see a portion of it. And if you go down to here, this is Crete. It's an island. It's presently controlled by Greece itself. You can visit there. Usually people go in on a cruise ship to see that too. But nevertheless, he was searching for this ancient kingdom of King Minos, and he found it. And this kingdom, which was named Knossos. And if you visit Crete today, you can take the little paid tour, and you can go out to see the ruins there. And it's kind of interesting there, 11-foot stone roads still in existence. There's no walled city whatsoever, because that was one of the characteristics of these Minoans. All right. They developed a type of writing which was called Linear A. Now, Linear A has never been translated. This was found in Knossos. And later we'll find another type of writing. I think here's it's part of one of your videos there, that's Linear B. Linear A. And I write that Linear A has never been deciphered, and Linear B has been deciphered. If you look at examples there in your textbook here, let's see, you can find it from page 51 if you wish to do so. These are very challenging languages to try to decipher with that. All right, now, if we try to make a comparison between these two societies, the Mycenaean society and that of the Minoan Society. For the Minoans, and I'm going to flip the document camera over here to show myself, and it's easier to try to show this illustration here. Women had an active role in society. You had women preachers, women bullfighters, women boxers. The women wore these flaring skirts, low-cut blouses, if you will. You can see what an artist rendering of what the men looked like at that time. They were excellent artists. They worked with frescoes. And if you thumb through your chapter there, you'll see some illustrations there, some photographs showing you some frescoes, art from the Minoans. And for the Mycenaeans were not nearly as sophisticated as that of the Minoans, much more warlike. They were located on the Greek Peloponnesus here. For their cities had walls. They practiced slavery. Cities were high on the hills, whereas in the Minoan society, the cities were down on practically ground level, and had stone roads, which were 11 feet wide. Sorry about muddling around on that. I was trying to get my big figure straight. But nonetheless here, let me go back to our illustrations here with the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. And by the year 1250, the Mycenaeans had won this war over the Trojans. They had also won this war over the Minoans. By the year 1200, the Mycenaeans fell to the iron-carrying Dorians, and the Dorians are located on Greek Peloponnesus there, and they would that would end that of the Minoans, and the Dorians would gradually develop into the Spartans. All right, so anyway, let's end that segment right here, and I want to move on into another area, and this is a a long subject within itself here, and it's a subject that deals with that of the Hebrews. All right, so let's go back to our documents camera here. For the Hebrews, it's a magnificent society. And for the Hebrew society, this society actually paled in comparison to the Mesopotamian civilization and also that of the Greeks. The Hebrews, on the other hand, provided more in the way of cultural aspects to the thought and the life of modern Europe than any other culture here. Now, many historians have discounted the biblical account of those events that took place between the time of Abram and the time of Moses. Now, Moses sometimes we refer to as Moshe, sometimes you call it Musa. If you're traveling in the areas of Turkey, you'll find many, many people by the name of Musa. If you're in Israel, you'll find many references to individuals named Moshe. All right, but many individuals, historians, discount those biblical events that took place between Abram and that of Moses here. The only thing that we have to go from is from the scriptures here. The only written records, or the earliest written records of the Hebrew society, took place in a hieroglyphic inscription from the year 1200. Now, argument still exists: were the Hebrews actually enslaved by the Egyptians, or were they not? And quite frankly, I don't really know about that. There's no written records of that. The only thing we have to go by is from the scriptures itself. All right. So anyway, let's take a look at some of the early history. It's going to be almost like going to Sunday school here, folks, so kind of bear with me just a little bit with this too. But according to the scriptures, Moses was born to a Hebrew family. He was born in the area of Goshen. That's in the northern parts of Egypt. And the rules, the laws at that time was that the male sons would be drowned in the Nile River. And so Moses' parents, one of his relatives, took Moses and placed him into a basket and set him adrift in the Nile River. And he was discovered by a Egyptian maiden and placed into custody of like a servant in the palace there, who actually was Miriam, who was the older sister to Moses. So Moses was raised as an Egyptian prince. But Moses killed, and you know the story as well as I, killed an evil Egyptian slave master. And he was banished from that area, and he went to Midian. He was probably about the year, age of about the year 40 at that time. And here in Midian, Moses met Jethro, and he married the daughter Zipporah. Now, at that time, God gave Moses three powers: the staff that turned his staff that turned into a snake, the leper's hand that healed when he put it inside of his robe, and water that turned into blood. And it was during this time that Moses actually talked to the angel, and the angel was represented by the burning bush. Now, if you're traveling in the areas kind of close to Sinai, down at, I think it's St. Catherine's Cathedral, you can find the burning bush. No kidding here. This is a photograph of what they will tell you is the actual burning bush. It buds in red. It can never be destroyed. It's one of a type plant. When I was there, I was looking for birds likewise, and had my binoculars with me, and I was looking at the burning bush, and it actually did have buds upon it there, so I don't know. You can't tell from the photograph, but there's a fence that's around it that keeps crazy people from coming in and trying to get sprigs off of it, or throwing paint on it or destroying it in some fashion like that. All right, but anyway, that's the burning bush that's present there. All right, now, let me pick up my focus again. And then Moses eventually returned with Aaron and went back to Egypt. And he pleaded with the Pharaoh at that time to let my people go. And of course the Pharaoh refused to do that. And that's when God brought forth the 10 plagues. Some of you probably are familiar with the 10 plagues: the water that turned into blood, the frogs, the biting insects in the form of lice, wild animals that would bite, livestock disease, bulls, hailstorms, locusts, darkness, and the death of the firstborn. All right, now the death of the firstborn, of course, would be appropriate for those Hebrews that were present there in Egypt at that time. So a signal was worked out that lamb's blood would be placed on the door facing, so that during Passover, the angels of God that would take the lives of the firstborn would spare the Hebrew families. And of course, when the angel of God came through during Passover, actually the son, Amenkepheseth, who was the son of the Pharaoh at that time, did lose his life. And with this, the Pharaoh agreed that the Hebrews could have permission to leave the Promised Land, or I should say to leave Egypt at that time. All right, now I'm going to go back to my illustrations here, and I'm going to share something with you. Find this. All right, here it is. And I'm working upside down, so this may be a little bit challenging for me to decipher for you folks here. All right, but let's get ourselves oriented. Here we have Egypt, which is present over here, and they're going to leave the area of what is called like Pi Ramesses, and leaving here. And the biblical accounts say that they actually crossed the Red Sea. Let's see here. Let me see if I can darken this camera a little bit so that you can see this a little bit. And bear in mind, I'm working upside down, so it's kind of challenging for me to see this. And now, where the Red Sea is located is down here. It says the Gulf of Suez, but that's the Red Sea. And the biblical accounts say that the Hebrews actually left there. But what historians think is that when the Hebrews left, and by this time the Pharaoh has changed his mind and is now in pursuit with the Egyptian army, is that actually where they crossed was right here at the Great Bitter Lakes. And where you can cross there, it's rather narrow and it's not very deep. And so they ended up crossing into this area here and entering into the Sinai Peninsula. Now notice here, this is Sinai, which is present here. When you're traveling in that area, the historical markers will actually tell you that this is where the Hebrews stopped. This is the well in which they got water from. You know, you can believe that for all you wish or not. And they ended up going down here. They were in the wilderness for 40 years or so, and they made their way down to where Sinai is located. And it's right here. It's called Gebel Musa, or Sinai Moses Mountain. That's what it translates to mean. So that's where they were there. And of course Moses went up Mount Sinai and was speaking with God. Let me show you what Mount Sinai looks like. And this is what it looks like, or what they say that it looks like anyway. And Moses actually went up the Moses Trail, and this Moses Trail, which went right up through here, such as this anyway. So it's rather high. Now, if you want to walk to the top of Mount Sinai, you can take that route if you wish to do so. What most people do, they'll take a pathway which will be off to this side over here. And usually what you do when you go up there, you'll leave about midnight, and what you want to do is be up there at the top of Mount Sinai by the time the sun comes up, by the time of sunrise. And it's about a 3-hour walk to go through there, and a rather steep walk, and particularly when you get up near the top itself. And you walk up there, and when you wait for the sun to come up, of course it's pitch dark until the sun comes up, and then all of a sudden as the sun begins to reveal itself, you'll find 200 or 300 people up there that you were completely unaware were present there before. And these are people from all religious sects, Christian sects, non-Christian sects, if you will, people of the Hebrew faith here. And anyway, and that was that. But and then on your return, what many people will do is go back the same path, but many people will take the Moses Trail and actually walk back down to St. Catherine's, where the burning bush is located there. When I was there, if I can find this, when I was there, I probably shouldn't have done this, but I picked up a stone here that actually came from Mount Sinai, and I thought you might want to enjoy seeing that, you know. So anyway, that was that with that. Now, Moses went up and to Mount Sinai, and God, of course, did not reveal himself, but God gave the 2 tablets, the 10 Commandments, to Moses, and Moses took them down to where the Hebrews were, which was down at the foot, or about halfway up, where the Mount Sinai is located today, and found that the Hebrews there, since Moses had been gone for 40 days, had turned to worshiping other gods, and of course Moses cast down the 2 stones, broke the 2 stones, and then had to go back up the mountain, Mount Sinai. And this time it was in such close proximity to God that his face became burned, that Moses had to wear a mask for the remainder of his life. Now, when Moses returned down to where the Hebrews were, and then led the Hebrews up through the wilderness here, coming up in this direction here. All right, and where they crossed, they went over north of the Gulf of Aqaba and crossed over here into what is present-day Jordan. Now, on the way, Moses had defied the word of God. God had told Moses that if he spoke to a rock, then the rock would produce water, and Moses took his staff and hit the rock, so he defied the commands of God, and God, of course, would not allow Moses to enter into the Holy Land. It is thought at this time Moses was 120 years of age. And when Moses and the Hebrews came up, they went up into this area here, and they crossed over such as this, if you're following with my marker, my pencil here, and they crossed the river Jordan and entered into the Holy Land. Now Moses himself Moses was not allowed into the Holy Land, into the Promised Land, so Moses had to stay on this side of the mountains here, up at Mount Nebo, and that's where he died. If I can find a likeness here of Mount Nebo, I'll show you what it looks like. And this photograph was taken from Mount Nebo, and this is roughly where Moses was standing and looking out over the Promised Land. The Promised Land is, let's see here, it's down in this area here. It's down in that area here. And I'm sorry I'm having to flip this photograph back and forth here. And so Moses, at the age of 120, or supposedly at 120, stayed and died, at Mount Nebo. If you're traveling in that area, you can also find a place in which his brother Aaron lies and rests today. It's high on the hill there. All right, so when the Hebrews actually entered, led by Joshua, and led into the Holy Land, they were in this area. Now, the Hebrews were pastoral people. That meant that they were shepherds, they're pastoral people, and they did not have military weaponry. So the only thing that they could actually do was just lay siege to the cities here. And the walls of Jericho eventually came down, but it was about 100 years before they did so. Now, the inhabitants of that area were the Canaanites, and eventually the Canaanites became completely absorbed into the Hebrew population. Now, where the real threat came from, it came from the south, and it came from a group, let's see if I have it down here, it came from a group which were called the Philistines. And the Philistines, those were I guess we better go back to the document camera here. And the Philistines. All right, now I want to show you an illustration here, because this is kind of interesting here, folks, where the Hebrews actually crossed. And this is crossing from Jordan, and Jordan would be on this side here, and crossing over to what we call Israel today. And you have the River Jordan here that provides a connection between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Now, the Sea of Galilee is up here, which is near Galilee, Tiberias, and the Sea of Galilee is 696 feet below sea level. You'll find some of the world's hottest temperatures to be present there. Daily temperatures in the Sea of Galilee, I'm not exaggerating this, 125 degrees here, This is fresh water. This is fresh water. At a later time, when we get to Jesus and Christianity, we'll spend more time on this. Now, the River Jordan, for a portion of the River Jordan, at a later time I'll show you a photograph of it where it does have water. But when I crossed the River Jordan, from Jordan into Israel, you couldn't even see where the river was. It was a dry bed. So many historians or many biblical historians will say that the River Jordan was parted so that the Hebrews could actually cross there. Well, heck, you can walk across it. It doesn't have any water in it. Now, if you go to the Dead Sea area, the Dead Sea, which is to the south, is 30% saline, 30% salt. Here, the temperature, or I should say, the sea level is 1,348 feet below sea level. 1,348 feet below sea level. Now, for the Dead Sea is 30% saline. 30% saline, that's far more salty than that of the oceans. And I'm telling you, good folks, you'll float like a cork when you're present there. Whatever you do when you're in the Dead Sea area, do not make the foolish mistake to open your eyes in the water itself. For idiots like myself who dare to do so, you have freshwater spigots, hydrants that are present on the banks right there where you can flush your eyes out. Because it is like somebody just stuck a hot poker within your eyes. It's agonizing pain with that. All right, so anyway, let's get back on track here and let me see where we are with this. All right, so the Hebrews were faced with extinction here because their bands were not united whatsoever. So what the Hebrews did, they had 12 tribal judges that came together, and under the influence of Samuel, and Samuel was the principal tribal leader. Let me get myself organized here. And under Samuel, what they determined to do was to choose a king, and the person which they chose to do so was Saul. And Saul was responsible for bringing about Hebrew unity. Saul, Hebrew unity, brought that about. But he was not a very popular king by any means, and he lost more times on the battlefield than he actually won. All right, and in fact, in battling the Philistines, Saul was mortally wounded on Mount Gilboa and ended up mortally wounded, and he took his own life. And a young warrior who supposedly slayed a giant of a person by the name of Goliath was now chosen as the king of the Hebrews. And this person is known as David, King David. You can see what they feel to be were the years of his reign, 1005 to 973 BCE, King David. If you go to Jerusalem today, you can actually find the tomb of King David. In Jerusalem, of course, it's in Israel, you'll find things that are quite a bit different than what we have in our Western culture here. If you go into the tomb, men cannot enter with women. Women enter into the tomb on one side of David's tomb, and men enter on the other side. You have to wear a little zippera. You have to wear a hat that's like a little beanie that fits over your head, to be allowed to go in. That's for the males. For the females, you do not have to do that, too. But anyway, for males, you never see the females. Females never see the males. In our country, you wouldn't be able to get away with that. All right, so let me see where we are with this, too. And eventually, the Philistines are going to be pushed back into the southern area of what is called Philistia. That's where the Gaza Strip is located today. Now, David was an absolute monarch. He collected taxes from the people. He also introduced a census, which would keep a record of who's paid their taxes, who has not. So in some respects here, David was not a very popular person. But David wanted to create a magnificent temple, a capital and a religious temple in Jerusalem. But he died in the year of 973. And he'll be followed by his son, this temple, he'll be followed by his son, who's Solomon. Solomon's reign was that of 973 to 933 BCE. It is thought anyway. And he wanted to complete his father's desires to create this temple in Jerusalem. Now, this would be known as Solomon's Temple. It was constructed around the year 960. When you read your supplemental reading assignment, you'll find it takes about 7 years to construct this temple. Now, for the temple, stones could be found, but the jewels and lumber were not present in Israel. There's very little in that fashion of those items there that's found there. So when you read your supplemental reading article, you'll find out that where these Hebrews and Solomon actually got these items, so what did they have to trade for them? And I'm not going to tell you that because I think that's one of your quiz questions there, one of your quiz questions you have to provide an answer for. Now, Josephus reported that this temple was 750 cubits by 750 cubits, located in Jerusalem, located on the Temple Mount. Well, the Temple Mount is not that size, so undoubtedly Josephus' estimate was a little bit smaller than what he thought anyway. Now, what was the reason for this? Well, partly to serve as a place of safekeeping for the Ark of the Covenant, and also as a place of worship for Yahweh. Now, Yahweh, I didn't write the name down. Yahweh, Y-W-H-W, is the Hebrew word for God, for Jehovah. I need you to recognize that. Yahweh, Y-H-W-H, or Y-H-W-E-H, Yahweh as well. All right, so anyway, this was known as the Ark of the Covenant. Let me show you what it looks like here. I'm going to show you a couple of illustrations here of the Ark of the Covenant. That's what it looks like. Notice the two angels there. It has the poles. You probably watched Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know what I'm talking about with that. Here's another artist rendering of the Ark of the Covenant here, such as this. And it's a holy relic, for the Hebrews. Supposedly what it did, the Ark of the Covenant, And if you were in class, I would ask you this, what are the contents of the Ark of the Covenant? And of course, the Ten Commandments were retained there, Aaron's budding staff, the pot, the golden pot that held the manna that provided the miraculous food, during the times in which the Hebrews were present in the wilderness here. So it's a very, very religious shrine here. It parted the rivers, brought a plague upon the Philistines, a number of other things here with the Ark of the Covenant. And supposedly it would be kept down in the Holy of Holies, the Holy of Holies, which is down in the recesses, if you will, of Solomon's temple. All right, so anyway, that's kind of interesting with that. All right, now, unfortunately for the Hebrews, they were weak. And upon the death of Solomon, the Hebrews divided. Now, united, they're weak. Divided, they're just ready to be picked off piecemeal. Now, if I had a larger map, I would show you how it was divided, but you just have to kind of imagine here with Israel. Perhaps I can use this too. If we look at where Israel is today, which Israel is right here, Israel was divided here after the death of Solomon, roughly about right in the center right here. Now, to the northern part, this northern part was referred to as the Kingdom of Israel. It had its capital in Samaria, or Shechem, as it's sometimes referred to as. And to the south, it had a much larger Kingdom of Judah, which was more than half of Israel as we recognize it today, that had its capital at Jerusalem. Both of these are weak anyway, and divided, of course, they're going to be picked off. Now, for the Kingdom of Israel, it fell to the Assyrians in the year 722 BCE, and it never rose again. For the Kingdom of Judah, it remained in place here for another 136 years until Nebuchadnezzar, with the New Babylonians, set siege to Jerusalem, an 18-month siege, and then finally the Hebrews gave up. And this was in the year 586 BCE. And that's when the temple was destroyed here. 10,829, get this, 10,829 Hebrews were enslaved by these New Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, carried back to Babylon, and that's where they spent the next 40 years, roughly the next 40 years here, 10,829. This is a time which is recognized as the Babylonian captivity here. All right, now, let's move on a little bit because we still have some ground to cover here. And I'll say this quite rapidly here. Israel and Jerusalem then was conquered by the Persians in 539, and that's when the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem. The temple was rebuilt in the years 520 to 516 BCE. Alexander the Great conquered that area in 532. Antiochus IV Epiphanes took the area over in 168 BCE. We had the Jewish revolt to take place under Judas Maccabeus in the year 165 BCE, and the Jews briefly regained their independence with that. Today, if you visit Jerusalem, if you visit Israel, one of the most popular beers that's present there is that of Maccabean beer, and it's very good. By 63 BCE, Pompey, the Roman general, took over the area of Jerusalem. By 66 CE, the Roman Emperor Titus came in, destroyed the temple, and that temple has never been rebuilt to this very day here. I must mention to you that it was during the time in which the first temple was destroyed, that the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. Historians argue to this day what happened to the Ark of the Covenant, and I really don't know. As the temple was destroyed, it may have been just buried in the ruins of the temple, perhaps so. Some people claim that they still find it today down in some of the narrow passageways that are hidden anyway by Hebrew scholars. Some people say that Nebuchadnezzar took it. Some people say it is buried in Mount Nebo. Some people say it's in a sea, at the Dead Sea, in a cave that's present there. Some individuals claim that it's in a temple, a religious center that is present in Ethiopia. If you go to Ethiopia, they will tell you that we have it right there. Only one person is allowed to see it, and when that person has died, one more person replaces him, and that person is the only person allowed to see it. Other individuals say it's in a United States government warehouse. The nation that has this can never be defeated, according to the legends with that. I honestly just do not know where it is. All right. I tell you what we've done here, folks. I've gone for almost 35 minutes now, so I think I'll cut this lecture a little bit close. I didn't finish this section on the Hebrews because I still need to talk to you about the Hebrew religion itself. So why don't we stop right now, and we'll pick Hebrew religion up the next time we get together. Don't forget, stay on top of your material, learn your material, work your quizzes here, and look at the videos before you come to class. Read your narrative notes, your supplemental reader, and your textbook here. All right, thank you very much.